Welcome! Let me move my mic up. Sorry. Professional streamer Matthew has still not figured out how to start the stream with everything ready, and I basically am out of water, so I may also die in the middle of the stream. But that's okay. Looks like there's only a few people joining us right now. We might give it a minute or two, let's say till 8:10, to see if some other people join. Before I start the coding stream, I'm pretty excited about this because I just got a new library to work for Python. Finally, I figured out how to get libraries to work. Before I couldn't get anything to install because my computer has a second installation of Python somewhere, so when I try to pip install from the CMD window, it installs somewhere I don't know where it is. But I figured out a workaround that I probably could have figured out a few months ago if I'd made the effort. Nevertheless, I have an automatic graphing tool now, so I should, with some Googling, be able to post the results immediately rather than having to open them up in Google Sheets. So that's exciting. How's everybody's day going? How are you doing? Tell me about it. As I said, we have a few minutes before we really start coding, 3 or so minutes, so I want to hear how everybody's day is going. I had a good Valentine's Day, got some burgers for my partner and I, watched a Star Trek movie. Today has been pretty slow so far. I was thinking about writing a little article about how the organization behind the Sanders for President campaign has already been a victory for a lot of us, whether you believe in electoralism or not, because it's bringing so many people into the world of leftist activism. And I was going to talk about my story, but I didn't get to that. I was also thinking of writing an article or doing a stream on how to change people's minds, how to better argue, win hearts and minds as leftists, but I also decided against that. Was feeling, I don't know, a little bit exhausted for that kind of introspective stream or writing. So in its place, here we are. We're gonna have a fun coding stream where I show off to the world how horrible I am with Python, but hopefully can access some insights I've been thinking about, and show them, I don't know, mathematically. It'll all be just models, and so it's not like it's gonna be deeply convincing, but it should be, at the very least, mildly interesting. How's your day been, Henry? I know you're working on homework. Sorry to drag you into the stream. Spent the day coding in Racket for a class. I don't know what Racket is. Yeah, good. Procrastination is good. Henry says, no, this is fun. I need to procrastinate a bit. I need to be better at reading the Twitch chat, because if I'm going to start uploading to YouTube again, if I don't read the comments, then people on YouTube will have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah, I was a really bad student back when I was in school. I would work efficiently, but I would basically work in 30-minute to an hour spurts in between multiple hours of procrastinating, and that was my process. And it's haunting me now that I don't have as much time to spend procrastinating, because it's kind of, I don't know, sabotaging myself, self-sabotage. I have no discipline. Oh, cool. Some language, Racket is based in some language of the 50s called Lisp, Henry says. Interesting. Okay, great. Well, pardon the temporary infinity window. I'm going to switch over to my desktop screen. And I'm not going to be able to see if people follow, so I'm going to rely on you guys to tell me if somebody has followed me, who their name is, so I can thank them. Other than that, I guess the time, in the words of Killer Mike, the time is now to explain this project. So a while ago, I had a bit of a controversial tweet, as us online activists do. And my controversial tweet was that economics is a zero-sum game. Basically, the poor can be winning or the rich can be winning, but it's a zero-sum game. You can't have both. Now, obviously, this was controversial because it flies in the face of literally what is taught in economics, which is that economics is not a zero-sum game, and that when the wealthy extract more resources, they pay the workers more, they pay more workers, and so more people benefit. And it's not fighting over the same scraps, it's everybody eating from an expanding pie, basically. So what does it matter if capitalists are getting 80, 90, 95% of the profits, so long as those profits continue to grow? The problem is that this concept of a zero-sum game flies in the face of physics, in the very simple fact that we do have finite resources, and unless asteroid mining becomes significantly easier and our biosphere is able to replenish itself significantly more easily than we believe so far, than it seems so far, then we're basically going to hit a point of overshoot where there are finite resources we can no longer extract more. And at that point, the economics become very viscerally zero-sum. But they were zero-sum the whole time. It was just a matter that the pie was so big that everybody could eat without having to worry how much the capitalists were getting quite as much. Now, people have tried to work their way around this by, economists I should say, not just normal people, have tried to work their way around this problem of the law of conservation of matter by arguing that economics is not bound by physical resources. And so you've often probably heard the circulation argument, where like, if I pay a plumber $20 to fix my sink, and the plumber pays a painter $20 to paint his car, and the painter pays a restaurant $20 for a meal, then you've created $60 of economic activity, or $80 of economic activity with $20. The problem is that isn't really, that's kind of like a mirage, because while all of those people have been incentivized to work because of this money that was created at the beginning of the system, maybe given to them by the government, maybe comes from the ground, whatever it is, those people have been incentivized to work, but the products that they're creating and the resources they're using are fundamentally zero sum. There isn't an infinite supply of paint, there's not an infinite supply of food, and there's not an infinite supply of, what was the first thing, of piping for plumbers. And so they're using resources, and indeed when they get that money, they have to exchange it for a physical quantity of goods, and that quantity of goods exists in the real universe. Now, there is an extent to which things like the sun is so long-lived, and its ability to power photosynthesis and life on Earth is going to last so much longer than we can conceive of, that it fundamentally feels infinite. But there is a maximum limit to the rate at which we can produce those resources. And so even if we were able to extract 100% of the solar energy coming to Earth and use it to efficiently produce all of those things, paint, food, whatever, there becomes a point where that rate of production is limited physically. And so once that point is reached, then the rates of consumption are relevant once again. And so if the capitalist class is consuming 90% of the resources, the working class is consuming 10%, that suddenly begins to matter, because we've hit a roof on how much more we can expand. And so if populations continue to grow, if quality of life increases at all, then workers don't get any more. And even if you freeze it in that moment where you're always in a stable state of capitalists getting 90% and workers getting 10%, the fact remains that the promise, welcome Tadpolian, I always love to have you in the stream, the theoretical promise of the capitalist that they will be able to create more wealth in the long term is falsified, because in that instance the rate of production has been reached. Like the rate of production and consumption are equal, and you can't expand production any longer. Who just followed and or subscribed? Somebody tell me so I can thank them. And so at that point you can't any longer say it doesn't matter that you're only getting 10% of the resources that we produce, because next year that 10% will be worth more, because it won't be. And so there will be no more growth, and you'll be stuck in the state of inequality forever. And so that is oh, welcome, OSnap. Thank you for following me. I apologize that I couldn't read your name. It's because when I pull up the OBS window, it creates an infinity mirror, and I'm not good enough of a streamer to figure out how to hide windows. And so all I can do is rely on chat to tell me. But thanks for following. I hope you enjoy the stream. So, as I drink some water, what I intend to show in this shitty, poorly coded Python model that I'm going to write in front of your judgmental eyes is exactly that. That economics is a zero-sum game, and that inequality cannot be forgiven by a theoretical infinity of growth, because no such infinity exists. All of that said, there's a decent chance that what I'm going to try to do doesn't work, in which case we'll just have to fall back to Google Sheets, and you will have to put up with what the stream put up with a few weeks ago, the first time I tried something like this. matplotlib.pyplot as plt. Why? I don't want to do this. I'll have to, there we go. I never said I was a good streamer. Import, I'm not a good streamer, a good coder. Alright. So, this first graph is going to be really easy. So we're going to do for I in range 1000. And let's create some resources. Resources equals 1000. Ted Pullian says, I think it's important to stress that even assuming infinite growth, there's an infinite margin the capitalist class can claim of that to the point where it doesn't matter. That's also true. And so you could basically approach zero even in an infinity scenario if the capitalist class is reinvesting the wealth that they extract into extracting more efficiently. So maybe we could model that as well, which would be interesting to see. Yeah, there's a lot we can do with this. We'll look at it. Yeah, see the chart with worker productivity versus wages. What Ted Pullian's referring to those who do not know, is that there is a graph, very helpful graph that has matched worker productivity over time to worker wages, and what it shows is that basically starting in the Reagan era, 1980s, worker productivity continued to increase, but worker wages stagnated. There's some bullshit, click the link Ted Pullian provided. There's some bullshit explanations that even other leftists have tried to sell that are things like, if you track the benefits, then the gap doesn't exist, so they're giving their workers health care, and so it doesn't really matter. But the fundamental problem with that claim is that those benefits should already be provided by the government, and so you're really just filling in for a need that already existed, and it amounts to net zero anyway. It's not like people stopped needing healthcare in 1980 and started, or didn't need healthcare before 1980. They always needed healthcare, and before, the wages that they received were on top of that healthcare, and the healthcare prices were not significantly higher. And so there's a lot of factors involved, but what it nets out to is what the chart shows. That is, workers are becoming more productive, but they're getting less of the fruits of their labor. Okay, resources equals, I don't know, 100,000, whatever. We're not going to use it at the beginning anyway. And we'll do P for proletariat, and we'll do C for capitalists. All right. C.append 0.9 and P.append 0.1. You know what? We should do it this way. So let's do C margin equals 0.9. That way we can easily change this. So we'll just do equals C margin, and we'll do 1 minus C margin. Also, please enjoy the wonderful sounds of a new Soviet WAV mix called Expedition that just came out a few weeks ago, and I'm excited about it. I love Soviet WAV for the background of my streams. Our Dream is my favorite mix, but there's also one called Melancholic Soviet WAV that will break your little heart. Let me know if the sound mixing is off in any way, and I can try to improve it. I strive to point my face towards the microphone, but I often fail. I am not a professional streamer, but I do enjoy this, so thank you for humoring me. All right. So this first chart is not going to be at all interesting, but it does prove a point, and hopefully it'll show if matplotlib works. So let's do plt plot. Oh, is that the proper? We'll see. We'll see. C copy. I use this for work, this matplotlib library, but I've forgotten, so I probably am using the wrong commands here, but let's just show plt.show, and we'll see. Alright. I'm also curious if this works just by clicking. If so, that's pretty helpful. This is the problem with having a coding stream, is that this is privilege. I don't want to run that. That's why it wasn't working. Is that I'm not much of a coder. Yes, that's correct. Thank you for pointing that out, oh snap. I realized it. I realized it before I saw your note, so that has to count for something, right? X and Y must have the first dimensions. Oh yeah, that's it. Okay. And we'll just do x dot append. Henry says whenever I use a library I haven't looked at for at least a week, I usually have to check Stack Overflow. Yeah, exactly. I think I got it right. I just didn't have the right access. And this is a really bad way of doing this, but you know, whatever. T equals 0, just a temporary value. And t equals t plus 1. Let's actually start at 1. All right. And let's define x. Nope. Okay, that was wrong. It should not be that way. It should be p equals 0, c equals 0. We're learning, but it'll be interesting once we are able to actually see things. So it's going to be c equals c plus c margin. So the capitalists are, in this case, it's an infinite resource world. There are infinite resources. The capitalists are always just taking 90%. That's the chunk they're taking, and they're never taking more. And there's infinite resources to use, and so it ends up looking like... Oh, it failed. Why did it fail? What did I do wrong? Oh, now that's... yeah, okay. So I still need to do this. Thank you for your patience. C-list dot append C P-list dot append P. Yeah, so it should look like this. And so the idea is that it doesn't matter if you are this orange line. This is what the capitalists are arguing. They're saying it doesn't matter if you're this orange line if you're only getting 10% of the profits every year, because every year we're going to make more money, and that's going to amount to more. And so we're able to expand our production, and you're actually doing better year to year. It doesn't matter if you're only getting 10%. Now, if we have something like this, so times, let's do resources, and let's say that every year you increase the available resources. And let's cut this down actually. Let's do 1,000. You increase the available resources by 1% every year. Now, what you get is this. And so it's even more apt description of what actually is happening. Let me see. Can I make this bigger? I don't know that I can. Are you having trouble seeing the graph, or is this fine? No, there we go. Look at that. All right. So, as it is in our current economic system, at least until we hit overshoot, we are every year able to access more resources. And this example isn't even correct because, as Ted Polian says, oftentimes the capitalists use their wealth to make their extraction of resources more efficient for themselves, and so they're getting higher margins, say 90%, 91%, 92%, whatever. But if they're only taking 90% off the top and you're increasing the resources you get every year, inequality increases, but if you're the bottom, it still looks like you're doing better off. You start here, you end up here. It doesn't matter that they're taking 90% still, because you're way better off than you were the previous year proportionally. It's not even linear, and it's even exponential for you too. And so let's see, let's expand the range to 10,000. Might take a second to run. I mean, it's hard because this is always going to look the same, isn't it? Regardless, this is an exponential curve too. Maybe let's just remove that. Only graph C list. Only graphed the proletariat list. So what workers are getting appears to be exponential, regardless. And so what does it matter that the capitalists are doing better? Because you are getting more and more of the resources every year because resource production is expanding. So this is a good opportunity to do what Tadpolian was saying and look at, as I undo this, look at what happens if the capitalist class gets more efficient at extraction every year. And so what we can do is we can have, I know this is not pretty code, but whatever. 1,000 is fine. What we can do is we can have this C margin increase. C margin times 1.1 is probably a bit much. Let's do 5%. So every year, the capitalists get 5% more efficient at extracting resources and take money away from the poor people. And so this is a universe, a hypothetical universe where you have infinite resources. I'm gesturing a lot with my hands. You can't see my hands, but trust that I'm making helpful gestures. This is in a universe where you have infinite resources, no limit to how much you can extract. But the capitalists every year put their resources that they extract back into, say, political processes, buying politicians to decrease labor laws, investing in drugs like caffeine or amphetamines or microdosing LSD that make workers more efficient while the capitalist class are able to extract more from them. And so whatever tools the capitalists can use to increase the margin that they get of the resources in the economy, they're going to use. And so let's say that amounts to a 5% increase every unit time that we're looking at. What that makes this chart look like instead is that. Obviously, you can't get below 0 resources. Let's see, this e to the 26. Let's lower this a ton then, so it's a more helpful chart. Obviously, you can't get below 0 for the worker. Oh, look at that. It saved all of the images. That's cool. Let's close you and close you. It illustrates what's happening here because, can I zoom? Even if at the beginning here, things don't look so bad for the worker, like right here, this is where the curve goes bad. Here, it doesn't look, up until this like hump, it doesn't look that bad for the worker, right? Can I go back, reset to original view? But as time goes on, the worker gets more and more extracted from, to the point that there can't be any wealth. So let me put a minimum on this. Min, it should be max, right? Yeah, max of that, and 0.001. This will make this more helpful to look at. Yeah. So in this model, this is what Tadpolian was describing earlier. Tad, are you still on? I want you to see this. The capitalists are becoming more and more efficient. Welcome. I'm glad that you're... It is a very nice graph, isn't it? The capitalists are becoming more and more efficient at extracting resources from the proletarians, while the proletarians aren't actually experiencing the benefits of their labor. And so the inequality... I should add in an inequality graph. I was going to do that. Inequality increases significantly compared to what we had before. because the capitalists are reinvesting. So this is, even if we had infinite resources, economics would still be a kind of zero-sum game, because the capitalist class would reinvest the earnings it gets from the economy into ensuring that they have a dominant position and are able to extract more and more of the total wealth in the economy without giving the worker anything more to work with. Great. Now that's... Ted Polian says, and an important thing to keep in mind, the worker isn't being paid in raw resources, they're being paid in currency. The exchange rate between that and actual resource is whatever the capitalists determine makes them the most profit, i.e. the most they can charge without significantly losing buyers. For something like insulin, which people will die without, the sky's the limit. Yeah, exactly. That's like, it's hard to put a tight bow on it. But basically what is being represented by this increase in C margin is all of those tools that they can use. So manipulating currency exchanges, manipulating markets, increasing the price of rent and healthcare. Basically any power that the capitalist has, it makes more sense for them to reinvest the money they have, the resources they have, into increasing their margins. Because in the future it'll make them even more money, they'll earn it back. And so a purely like psychopathic economic determination tells you that you should invest your money in ensuring that labor gets as little as possible by whatever means necessary. And so even in this hypothetical fairyland where we had infinite resources, we'd still get into a position like this. Let me make a inequality graph. So in EQ equals C minus P. Actually, let me do this. In EQ is a list, and we'll do range. Then C list. And EQ dot append C list I minus P list I. And that's graph in EQ now. What? Oh, is that, it doesn't like that, does it? Can I add it through another command? This is where my limit of pyplot comes into play. plt.plot x, comma, q. Let's see. Will it let me do it that way? Doesn't look like it. Well, let's just comment this out then. So in this model, let me do it first. So I have the other chart up. In this model, what you see is the wealth gap. Basically, as I said before, the capitalists spend their money extracting more resources from the infinite economy, and so even though the workers are should theoretically be benefiting from infinitely more resources to exploit, the capitalists are taking a wider and wider margin, and what it ends up with is the workers basically getting no advantage to the infinity of resources, while the capitalists take everything away. And we talked about what mechanisms they use. But what we can do is resources also increase exponentially. So what happens right now is that resources are increasing linearly. If they increase exponentially, the curve would just be steeper. I can look at that. Let's just look at this inequality first, if you don't mind. So what that means in terms of inequality is it is infinitely increasing as well. And so the difference between this and this actually might be, that could be why. The difference between the worker and the capitalist is increasing exponentially. Let me see something, because I think this might actually have worked. I just didn't trust the system. And let's comment this out, so there's no C margin. So this is going back to if the capitalists aren't increasing the efficiency with which they exploit, but there are infinite resources. Yeah, look at that. Cool. So this is the inequality. So even if they're not increasing the efficiency with which they exploit and resources are increasing, you can see that the inequality still increases over time. And the argument that capitalists make, as I was saying at the beginning of the stream, is it doesn't matter that inequality, this green line, is increasing, which is the difference between these two, because the orange line is still increasing. But we can see that if you add in the fact that capitalists are going to try to take more and more, that orange line, that proletarian line, doesn't actually increase anymore after all. And so what you end up with is just increasing inequality and basically nothing else. Let me close all of these out. Now let's try Henry's example, and let's say that resources increase exponentially as well. So instead of resource equals resources plus 10, I'm going to try to leave all these as comments so I can add or remove them as I want to. Let's do resources equals resources times 1.005. Basically looks even steeper. And so if we're exponentially taking more resources and the margins are increasing, and the capitalists are investing their wealth into extracting a greater proportion of the wealth that's created, basically proletarians still get basically nothing. It just increases the steep, what is it? The steepness, that can't be the right word. The slope, the rate of change here. It doesn't do anything to ease the inequality or make things better for the worker. However, if this stops happening and the capitalists stop reinvesting, what you end up getting is even steeper increases in wealth, but the inequality increases as steeply as well. And so basically what this says is that it takes an infinite wealth of resources and a capitalist class that is benevolent in order for workers to benefit from the exploitative nature of our economy. Now, this 90% margin is probably a little bit generous to the capitalists that say that they are taking 60%, which is probably the other way wrong. I don't know what the actual percents are. Let's use the same model. It still ends up looking roughly the same. The inequality is still increasing. And so the things might look better for the worker on a day-to-day basis. Actually, this is inequality. Things might be looking better for the worker on a day-to-day basis. But once you add in the fact that the capitalist class tries to take as much as they can and reinvest their resources to do so, that basically doesn't matter anymore. Same thing happens. And like the difference between this graph and this graph, this is a world where capitalists are altruistic and never try to spend their resources to extract more wealth. They're always giving the worker 40% and they're always taking 60% for themselves. This is the world we live in. And both of these worlds are false because there is no limit to the resources that can be extracted. And that's the next thing we're going to do. So we're going to be generous and assume that once we hit overshoot, let's do resource cap equals 10,000. I don't know how much. Once we hit overshoot, it doesn't crash the economy. This first example is going to be like, okay, we hit overshoot, but we figure out how to remain completely competitive, right? And so let's do resources equals min resources, resource cap. So like you hit the cap and we don't have overshoot and have our entire system collapse. People just take less, and let's take off the C margin. So this would be like if we realized that we can't produce more agricultural goods because we've nitrificated the soil too much and we're out of the resources, the industrial fertilizer needed to produce as much food, and the whole world decided, okay, we're just going to stop economic growth, we're only going to repair things, and we're going to be completely carbon neutral, but we're going to somehow keep capitalism alive. This is a theoretically impossible, but whatever, sustainable capitalism that doesn't expand further once it's reached the point of overshoot and stays at that level, that resource cap level. So you can see that it basically becomes, why does it become linear? It should cap out, right? Am I reading this wrong? Let me plot resources. I can't plot resources, can I? T equals... You know, I could have coded this all before stream and tested it, and then I could just do this like a PowerPoint presentation, but would that be as much fun? I don't think it would be as much fun. Henry doesn't think it would be as much fun. No, I need to do temp. This way you can judge me. Temp.append resources. And that's chart temp. It's a coding adventure. So what should be happening is resources hits a cap. It's way down there, so maybe I should only graph this. plt.plot x, comma, what was it called? Temp, yeah. Oh, At least you don't see an infinity window. Yeah, so this is happening. So there's a resource cap. So they hit the resource cap here. This isn't the right chart. And after that point, basically, inequality increases even though... because it's not capping out. Okay. So this is incorrect. The model is wrong here. Because it's assuming that the resource cap is exactly what it was before. So what it needs to be is probably min that and resource. One minus C margin. If I have to explain this code to anyone ever, I will fail. That should be right now, right? I believe so. Now, the same thing here. So basically what this is doing is saying that you can't get more resources than the resource cap. Neither class can, and you'll get stuck at whatever proportion it was. So, min of that, I should add another parentheses, and then that should be resource cap times C margin. Alright, so now you're limited to whatever percent of the resource cap you get once the resource cap is reached. Hopefully this looks better. Let's comment this out and take you back. No, why? I don't want to go to Steam. Let's see Capcom games. Now that's a chart. Can I zoom to rectangle? And just... So, in this theoretical, basically, the, and maybe I should make it back to 90-10 to exaggerate it. Let me pop this back. In this model, once society reaches ecological overshoot, everybody just decides to call it a day. And our economy stops expanding and we stay exactly where we are. And the problem with this, if you are the worker, is that the promise, the reason why you are okay with this in the capitalist worldview, the liberal worldview, why you don't overthrow your boss, is that you are theoretically, like in this part of the chart, let me do this, getting more wealth every day. I can cut it off even more, can I? Yeah. So what does it matter? If inequality is increasing, you're getting more and more and more. And as long as infinite growth happens, you'll get as many resources as there are. And eventually, you're both approaching infinity, right? And so your quality of life is going to keep increasing. Capitalist quality of life is going to keep increasing. Sure, maybe yours could increase faster, and maybe that's an injustice worth having a revolution over. But why risk it if you're going to get more year to year? Because these wonderful capitalists have promised to always give you 10% and not take the money away, right? And so it ends up looking like this in the end, because there is a point of overshoot. And so now, why would you remain this guy? Why would you keep the orange guy if you're not getting more resources every year? If you're only getting your 10%, why not just go for the 90%? Because there's no promise of expansion. There's no promise of an improved life in the future. You don't benefit from this system anymore. Whereas back in this corner, for this while, it looked like you did benefit from it. But you don't anymore. And it gets even worse when you add the C margin back in, what that Tadpolian was talking about, where capitalists reinvest their wealth into stealing as much as they can and stealing a greater proportion. Because now, I really freaked out the graph, huh? Is this the inequality line? Let me take this out and see. No, it's the P list. Why is it going? It should be able to go below 0. Let's see. Is there no longer a minimum? Is that the problem? Ah, that is the problem. All right. No. Well. It's supposed to always add that, so why would it be subtracting? Because the C margin is able to get above? Ah, that's why. Alright. So capitalists cannot extract more than 100% of the resources. Let's add that quick fix in. No, why? Why is it still? Well, you get the point. Basically, if you just imagine this is 0, so this can't be below 0. Now, if the capitalists are extracting more and more resources, even in spite of the cap, you are the one who suffers for it if you're the worker. And so this is actually a perfect example, because this is pretty much how the world really works. When we run out of resources, the proletarians get less than 0. They starve. And so the capitalist class, increasing their margins, even in the face of a circumstance where you have a cap of resources, and even in this idyllic scenario, where there is no overshoot and the economy simply stops growing, the greed of the capitalists to try and extract more and more from the economy, which, as we talked about before, is just, it makes sense to them. It's economically logical to extract more resources from the economy if you can get away with it every year. Increasing their margins means, in this scenario, this is kind of like our real world, but it's even less grim than our real world, that directly causes the destruction of the proletariat, right? Their inequality is shooting up, the wealth of the capitalist class is shooting up, and who pays for it? The proletarians do. This is the moment where it's supposed to be best for the proletariat, right? But once you hit that cap, once you hit that cap, it's not worth it anymore. Whatever benefits you're theoretically getting, whatever increase in your wealth you're getting, is just not worth it. should do 0.9. I don't know why the proletariat graph is going negative. Probably after a stream I'll immediately realize it. But it still illustrates the same point, right? In a system where you have finite resources and where the economy is trying to expand how many resources it can extract all the time. Let's lift the resource cap and just see what happens, maybe. And the capitalist class is trying to take as much as they can and expand how much they take every year. That's why. All right. Oh no, that should be correct. This should be min. That's what it is. Got it. And the capitalist class is trying to extract as much as they can every year without ever stopping. What you end up getting is this picture, where at the beginning, which is where we are now, things look pretty good for everyone, or at least pretty okay, right? The capitalist class is running away with it, but you know, at least for these orange guys, us orange boys, us proletarians, we're still getting more every year. Quality of life is improving, and so it doesn't make as much sense to go after the people at top. But when you zoom out and see the system for what it is, it basically means that inevitably the wealthy are going to spend all the resources that they can hoarding the wealth and taking away everything they can from the rest of us. I should make this big, shouldn't I? So this is the beginning of the boost. And I can probably increase the resource cap even more to make it more worthwhile. And then decrease this margin. That's a pretty graph. Do you see it? I mean, I don't know. If you agree with this math, if you agree with the model that I've shown, then you can't reject the premise that capitalism will inevitably result in the destruction of the underclass for the benefit of the capitalist class. As long as they try to extract more resources, and as long as they continue to get a greater proportion, so as long as they extract more resources and they continue to get a greater proportion of those resources, the only possibility is that at some point the capitalists begin to consume the worker instead of the planet, right? Economics is fundamentally a zero-sum game. There is not an infinity of resources to rely on, and there's not a set deal where the capitalists agree to only take 90%. Capitalists are always going to be expanding how much wealth they can extract. They're always going to be expanding how many resources they can take away. They're going to use every tool in their disposal to protect that wealth. And they're going to do so up until the point that we really run out of resources. And keep in mind, this is a good graph. Keep in mind that this is literally assuming that there is no ecological collapse following an overshoot. This is assuming that once you hit this resource limit, we somehow reorganize our society to be completely sustainable but maintain the existing power structures. And so the real world, this number goes way down. The proletarian shoots into the nether and is destroyed by starvation and death, while the capitalist builds their fucking Elysium space stations and try to live in luxury forever in the ether above. It's what we're fighting against. Well, on this optimistic stream, I guess I'll just return to that point. If you agree with the model I've provided with the numbers, not the exact numbers, but the general idea here, then you basically have to concede that capitalism isn't just, and that in opposition to what the libertarians or whoever it was that posted my tweet and got really mad about it argue, economics is a zero-sum game. You have some kind of resource cap. You cannot produce infinite resources. And as such, the plight of the worker will never be overcome. There's not going to be an infinity of growth. There's not going to be an infinitely improving life of the proletarian class. We're going to hit a wall because of overshoot, or we're going to be crushed as the capitalists try to infinitely expand their wealth. And when either of those things happen, we will be the people who pay. We will be, if I can pull up the graph again, I don't know why I closed it out. It is 2020, February 15th, and you are here. The proletarian. Looks like things are getting better for us, at least in the global north. But we're about to go diving off a cliff so that these assholes can take a greater margin of whatever resources are left. As soon as you hit overshoot, which is what this line is, even if we manage a completely sustainable transition, we suffer. You missed so many graphs, Elgaso. You're going to have to watch the VOD. This hasn't been my most coherent stream, and I've done a lot of repeating, but it's interesting. It's one of my most mathematically interesting. Perhaps I should label the graph, eh? But at least I can explain it. There is no way for economics to benefit everybody under a capitalist model. There are winners and there are losers. And so if you accept this, unless you think that something is fundamentally incorrect about the numbers that I provided, then the only thing it can mean, again, this green line is inequality, blue line is the wealth of the capitalist class, and orange line is the wealth of the proletarian class. If you are this group, which most of you are, the vast majority of humanity is, then your only solution is organizing to make sure that these assholes stop taking 90% of your wealth. Because what it could look like what the system could be is this for all of us. Ignore the capitalists. This could be the story of humanity. Increasing our well-being with the resources we have until we've hit our natural limit, the best lives we can provide everybody, and everybody being here together, living in the utopia this represents. Or better yet, having a more sustainable economy. But instead of this life, the life that all of us want, this is the life we're being given. We're going to drop off a cliff because the capitalists can't be satiated. They always want to take more away from us. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Elgaso, the proletarian, can have a little bit of surplus value as a treat. Ted Pulliam says, one of my Marxist-Leninist friends from the U.S. who's accelerationist says it'd be better if Trump gets a second term because there's a progressive charge during the coming recession. The R's will relentlessly hold the progressives responsible in a way the chicken shit Dems won't. Thoughts? I mean, that's a pretty... Basically, in order to believe that, you have to believe that the American people are completely incapable of having their minds changed about anything, and that the handling of economic crashes by liberals is indicative of the only way to ever handle any economic crash ever. Let me switch over to the screensaver scene, and change the title to leftist chats. And so this is my contention, and it's the contention I've seen, and I find it convincing. What's going to happen is that if there's a recession under a Bernie Sanders presidency, or a socialist presidency, progressives and socialists will use that to justify massive redistribution of wealth, the destruction of Wall Street, in a way like FDR did, only probably more extreme. You forget that pretty much every socialist revolution has succeeded in a time of intense economic tumult. And they've succeeded not because the economic conditions were perfect in the moment and they were able to not take blame for any failures. It's because they were able to accurately point out who had caused the system to fail. So if Bernie gets elected, and there's a massive economic crash, and there may be a massive economic crash in direct response to Bernie getting elected, what Bernie is going to do is he's going to adopt his socialist policies. He's going to take it as an excuse to nationalize the banks, to create more fair banking practices, to do everything that Obama should have done following the Great Recession. And if we truly believe, as I think all of us do, that leftism is a successful policy agenda, socialism is a successful policy program, then we have to believe that that will work, and that that will fix the economy, and that it will in fact make people more pro-communism. To deny that is basically to deny the power and success and ability of communism to succeed at all. Henry said, I've heard the counter-argument that progressives can utilize the recession to force through reforms like FDR did. Yeah, exactly, Henry. Tadpolian says, that and in the case of a recession, we want somebody in charge who will actually take care of workers rather than let them suffer. Yeah, like, what's the alternative? We have Trump in office during the recession. Assuming that the capitalists will even allow their precious stock market to collapse with socialists, with Trump in power. But B, workers suffer and die on a huge scale, and no reforms are made to the economy, and it puddles along to revolution. It doesn't seem to be a more successful policy plan, in my opinion. El Gasso said, how is it the power of communism and not the power of social democracy? To play devil's advocate for a second. Well, I mean, social democracy has some similar policies to communism, but that doesn't mean that it's not the power of communism. Like, what we're talking about here, we're saying that if there were a recession, Bernie would make the banks public. And what that means is turning what was once a private entity into something that is controlled by the American people, aka transferring ownership of the means of production into a democratic system. Now, you can argue about whether that's true democracy or whether it satisfies the kind of direct control that a purely aesthetic view of socialism would provide, but it really is pretty much inarguably some kind of socialist model, right? You are transferring ownership away from private control and into the public of the means of production. And so even though social democrats like FDR have adopted those policies, that doesn't mean that they're not communist policies. You can adopt communist policies to social democratic ends, and indeed, you can adopt social democratic frameworks to communist ends. The two are not exclusive and never have been. Good question, though, El Gasso. I appreciate the devil's advocates. Gives me an excuse to keep talking. Ted Pullen says, because showing people that they're better off when the capitalists get weaker is a step towards getting rid of them altogether. Yes, exactly. That's another good point, Tad. Henry says, if a recession happens under Sanders, the smears would be relentless. Messaging that this is the result of the forces Sanders wants to fight against would be essential. Basically, yeah, we have to trust that Bernie and his team are going to successfully be able to use the bully pulpit to place the blame where it belongs. But I don't think that'll be that difficult. Think about Occupy Wall Street. At a time where basically Obama sucked and did nothing to stop the recession and punish the people who caused it, there was still massive outrage against the capitalist class, enough that there were huge occupations in American cities that some people thought were like a genuine threat to the system, and that was without the bully pulpit, if you had a Sanders presidency. Exactly, Occupy Wall Street, but the president is actually attending, as Napoleon put it. That would be the easiest thing in the world. Fascism is terrifying and successful because fascist demagogues are able to successfully use the power of the bourgeois and the petite bourgeois and the state often to convince the masses of people that the problem that caused the recession, the suffering they're going through, was a minority, and the solution is to give more power to the corporate elite, to more power to the capitalists, and to punish ethnic minorities. That strategy only works because under intense economic pressures, under collapse, people are looking for somebody to blame. And we have the better argument as socialists, and it's not like it's an impossible task to shift the blame away from Bernie Sanders and the government and towards capitalists when it's literally the capitalists who crash the economy and not Bernie Sanders. Elk also said, well, the argument here is really what Lyndon said, that something like nationalizing the banks for the American public just turns the American public into petty bourgeois who depend on the exploitation of third world workers to prop up those banks for their own benefit, which is still capitalist. I mean, there are layers and layers, and no socialist movement can really be socialist without internationalism. I agree with that 100%. And so you need an anti-imperialist policy. However, to say that it is capitalist because the state in this case is exploiting third world workers is kind of a really big stretch of what the word capitalism means. You could convince me that that is an independent economic system that is not a step towards socialism and should be avoided, but it's difficult to argue that that makes you petty bourgeois because it's so completely distinct. Like, the capitalist class under capitalism is defined by being a very small group of people who, by virtue of already having money, are able to control the means of production and to get more money as a result. And so, if you argue that, if you have a system where everybody in America is owning the banks, for example, or the big industries, and those industries are profiting off of the wealth of the third world, that's no longer an intensely small capitalist class who gets money by the virtue of already having money. It's a national exploitation game, and it's just raw, socialist imperialism, which is possibly a problem, and it's something that would need to be faced and destroyed. But I don't think that that makes attempts to nationalize industry and nationalize business and nationalize basically everything in first world countries a capitalist endeavor or a social democratic endeavor. It's still a socialist endeavor, still a communist endeavor. It just has the potential of derailing into reactionary failure if there is not internationalism built within it. Ted Pullian says, there are limits to electoralism, but we've got to find them first in it. In it. Oh boy, Ted Pullian. But yeah, that's true. It's difficult to see what at least Americans have done in the last 50 years to test the limits of electoralism. And this is an aside, but one of the most convincing arguments I've ever heard in favor of electoralism is that basically in the American South, not in the American South, in the pre-Civil War America, the people who pushed and successfully caused abolition initially built their power through electoral means, and even through electoral means that people today would call liberal shit. Like, the first people who opposed slavery in Congress weren't even opposed to slavery. They were called Freelanders, and all they wanted was that the new states would not have slavery on them. That was their hard line. And abolitionists organized to get Freelanders into office, and those Freelanders were the first people to defect from the Whigs and create the radical abolitionist Republican Party. And so literally the only model we have for civil war and radical shift in economic mode of production in the United States is electoral. We don't have a history that shows the success of massive revolution. Now, labor unrest is worth talking about and was successful, and indeed, slavery was not fought through electoralism alone. It was a lot of abolitionists on the ground forcing politicians through. However, the fact that there was an electoral wing meant that there was a civil war in the United States that was much easier to win for abolitionists rather than an insurgency, which would have been far more difficult. If I really cared, it was Abe's opinion when he took office. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, he wrote letters to Marx, but he was not radically in favor of abolition. He was kind of ideologically everywhere. But he was a tool that was able to be used by the abolitionist movement to ensure that there was an incredibly powerful government fighting on the side of abolition. And without him, the Civil War would have either been impossible or would have been far, far bloodier. What is it? Is it Kaiserreich, the mod that has the American South turn into a communist state because they win the Civil War and then overthrow the South? That slaves overthrow the South. Ted Pulliam says, push electoralism to its limits, and when you can't vote your way to any more socialism, abandon the system. I absolutely agree. Electoralism is also probably our best route for building dual power. All right, comrades. My voice is fucking gone. I did not prepare with water, and so my water bottle is empty. However, I am going to respond to this Henry vote thread because Kaiserreich is interesting to me. But after that brief rant, I think we're going to call it a night. I've had a really great time with all of you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that some of the graphs were at least nominally interesting, if not proof in and of themselves of capitalism's inevitable failures. Economics is a zero-sum game. Kaiserreich has the South be a sucked-in dictatorship that might end up extremely fascist. The North becomes syndicalist. I know that the North becomes syndicalist. I watched Chapeau Trap House fail. I think it was Chapeau fail at playing Kaiserreich, which was interesting to me. Elgasso said there was a book series where John Barnes' Raid and Harper's Ferry did actually inspire slave results, and it created black communist societies in America. I forget what it's called, though. Yeah, what's interesting to me, Elgasso, just to comment on that before we leave, is that it's basically been completely whitewashed from American history that abolitionism was deeply tied to communism, and many of the strongest abolitionists were avowed communists. In fact, there were internationalist brigades of communists who came to the United States to fight against slavery. I think it's August or Augustus Willich was a German socialist who commanded parts of the Union Army, and he would sing the Marseillaise, the song of the French Commune of the French Revolution, to his troops before they would charge into battle. And he would build bakeries, build ovens to bake fresh bread for his troops before battle. Real socialist stuff. So it's interesting to me, and I wish more people were aware of the socialist roots of abolitionism. Great. Well, if you liked the stream, please consider following me. If you enjoyed the graphs and would like to see more of similar work, feel free to go to my YouTube to go through my past articles that I have posted below in my Medium. If you want to support me, feel free to go through Patreon or to subscribe to me on Twitch. It's always appreciated. And if you want to talk more with me after hours or see what I'm up to when I can't stream because I am a lazy piece of garbage, please feel free to join my Discord below where we have lots of good conversations. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great night, comrades.